Israel escalates Hamas offensive. Exposes horrors of Hamas. Kids' bedrooms used to stock weapons. Hamas rockets found in strollers. Search operations continue at Al-Shifa Hospital. Israel war machine rages on. Top focus on India first.
Let me get you the latest from Gaza City and North Gaza. Israeli soldiers have found a tunnel shaft used by Hamas terrorists at Gaza's Al-Shifa Hospital. The Israeli Defense Forces have claimed that a body of an Israeli hostage was also found in the hospital compound. A 65-year-old woman abducted by Hamas terrorists on the 7th of October and murdered in Gaza. Israeli forces have intensified their operations in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank with raids at the Ibn Sina Hospital after an IDF soldier was killed in a terror strike. All 3 suspected terrorists have also been killed. Israeli forces have dropped leaflets in the Khan Yunis area of southern Gaza asking people to evacuate immediately. Does this indicate a major expansion of ground operations beyond Gaza City towards southern Gaza? That's our top story.
Hamas terror network linked to Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City stands exposed. Israeli troops are searching rooms and basement of Gaza's biggest hospital after days-long siege that caused global alarm over the fate of thousands of civilians trapped inside. Hamas's tunneling infrastructure inside the hospital is now revealed. The Israeli forces also seized a vehicle containing weapons and ammunition that was to be used in October 7th massacre.
IDF forces found a tunnel shaft in Shifa Hospital. Engineering forces are currently uncovering the infrastructure there. We also found a vehicle that has been prepared for the massacre on the October 7th and didn't leave. And we found many weapons in it. I want to emphasize a car of Hamas terrorists with many weapons within the ground of Shifa Hospital.
Al-Shifa Hospital has become the main target of the ground operation by Israeli forces, who claim Hamas fighters ran their operations from headquarters in tunnels beneath it. Hamas has denied the charge.
After 20 hours of attacking all the hospital facilities, searching and tampering with all the contents and departments, the spokesperson of the occupation army came out as usual with a weak and ridiculous story, saying that he had found several rifles, a Kalashnikov, a laptop, a military uniform and an old pair of shoes which he displayed on the shelves and moved from one place to another and appearing in front of journalists as if he has displaying his goods in a supermarket or in a hotel room.
Israel says its troops uncovered weapons and terror infrastructure inside the hospital compound after killing fighters in clashes outside. There was no fighting or friction with civilians, patients or staff inside the hospital, according to the IDF. Israel also claims to have found the body of Yehudi Twiss, one of around 240 hostages taken by Hamas gunmen when they stormed southern Israel on October 7. The body was recovered by troops in a building near the Al-Shifa Hospital. Even as Israeli Defense Forces mount operations inside the Al-Shifa and other hospitals in the locality, civilians who have taken shelter in these facilities are demanding a ceasefire. Bureau Report, India Today.
Israeli Defense Forces say brick by brick, tunnel by tunnel, hospital by hospital, they're dismantling the Hamas terror infrastructure, military terror infrastructure in North Gaza and in Gaza City. The indication are soon they will expand south of Wadi Gaza River. They intend targeting Khan Yunis. Israeli forces say that Hamas terrorists were using not just the Al-Shifa Hospital as its command and control center, but also other hospitals, including the Al-Rantisi Children's Hospital, as a weapons storage facility as a rocket launch facility and as barracks for Hamas terrorists. The IDF claims they've neutralized several Hamas terrorists who are hiding inside a school, and several weapons and systems have been recovered, thereby making a case for expansion of operations beyond Gaza City.
Israel Defense Forces continue to uncover the horrors of Hamas hidden beneath the 3 largest hospitals in Gaza. A tunnel under the Al-Shifa Hospital complex. Weapons and ammunition recovered inside Al-Quds Hospital. And yet another tunnel under the Rantisi Hospital. In fact, the Rantisi Children's Hospital has been used by Hamas terrorists to hide arms and possibly hold hostages. A 6-minute video released by the IDF shows the house of a Hamas terrorist right next to the hospital.
I'm here in Gaza City. We are here next to a house of a terrorist. This is one of the senior terrorists who is the head of the operational naval operations that led the raids into Israel. His house is 200 yards from the hospital of Rantisi. Next to his house, there is a tunnel. Now I want to show you an operational tunnel. The tunnel is built with electricity, a door that is bulletproof, it's explosives proof, so it looks like a hard evidence, a clear evidence that the hospital direction is connected. It's part of the same floor and it slides down here. So it's a covered tunnel so nobody can find it.
The tunnel under Rantisi Hospital led the IDF to an operational base.
There is a list. This is the back side of the hospital. Hamas used this hospital. Tonight we have entered into this building. I will show you the evidence. Let's enter into the hospital. We are now in the area of the basement of the hospital. I want to show you a room where we found all the gear, the operational gear of Hamas. Hamas is using hospitals, like we showed the evidence in Shifa Hospital. In other hospitals, we are now seeing it in live in Rantisi Hospital. Among hospitals, among patients, we have hand grenades, Kalashnikovs, and then we have the RPGs. People shooting RPGs from hospitals. This is Hamas, firing RPGs for hospitals. The world has to understand who is Israel fighting against. We are now in the basement, and in this basement we found a motorcycle. They were all used in the massacre of the 7th of October.
Israel says that some hostages were also kept under the Rantisi Hospital.
Yards from here, we find the chair, a woman, clothes, and a rope. A rope next to the legs. Look above it. It's a baby bottle. This is a suspicion for an area where hostages were being held. We're now looking at an infrastructure. You don't need to build something improvisedly in a hospital in the basement. We can see this area is a closed area from the rest of the hospital. We can see the ventilation air that was done improvisedly to this area. And we can see infrastructures that was built in here, toilets, shower, a small kitchen, will provide the terrorists their needs. This list says we are in an operation. The operation against Israel started in the 7th of October. This is a Guardian list where every terrorist writes his name and every terrorist has his own shift guarding the people that were here.
Hospitals or Hamas terror hideouts. The truth is slowly emerging for the world to see.
And this is where they choose to hide everything.
Bureau Report, India Today.
So there are reports that leaflets have been dropped over Khan Yunus in southern Gaza Strip. Are we looking at an expansion of operations, ground operations in southern Gaza next? I quickly want to cut across to a man on the ground. Rajesh Pawar joins us for more from Sderot in southern Israel. Rajesh, there are reports that seem to indicate that Yoav Gallant, the Minister of Defense, and also Benny Gantz, both in the war cabinet, are in favor of expansion of ground operations to south. Is that what is likely to happen in the days and weeks ahead? And what does that mean for the hostage crisis?
Look, Gaurav, this is very clear. Now the Israeli plan is very clear. Now they have completely demolished every target of Hamas in north of Gaza. And after this, now their focus will be south of Gaza. But the biggest challenge in this will be the transfer of population. Now you see that all the people, civilians from North Gaza were evacuated to south of Gaza. Now the entire populations will have to be shifted back again in north of Gaza, where there is no civilian infrastructure anymore. Besides this, there are reports that yesterday IDF has bombed targets of Iranian proxies in Syria near Damascus. So these are indications that first IDF will take care of south of Gaza, and after that they will be moving north for taking care of Hezbollah. This seems to be the plan of IDF as of now, Gaurav.
Okay. And overall, when you're looking at situation on ground, especially with the kind of evidence that Admiral Hagari seems to have put out, as Colonel Jonathan Connicus seems to have put out of what they claim was a command and control center of Hamas at the Al-Shifa and also at Al-Rantisi. What's the buzz on ground? Is this evidence that will hold in a court of law, or does it convince people that this hospital was actually a Hamas command and control center?
Look, Gaurav, even the Americans have confirmed that there was Hamas command and control center under the hospital, this Al-Shifa Hospital. Most of the civilians here, the Israeli civilians, believe that to be true, and Israelis are going in a very systematic way as far as collection of evidence is concerned, documenting the evidence is concerned. They're going in a very systematic way, and I think if it goes to a court of law sometime later in International Criminal Court, I think they will stand the case because they are doing it in a very systematic way, and all the evidence is being collected right now, including DNA samples and the kind of weapons which are used on civilian cars. Gaurav.
So DNA samples are being collected, samples of those who were taken hostage from southern Israel and held hostage at Al-Shifa, including the body of a 65-year-old woman whose body was found at the Al-Shifa Hospital. All of this is evidence that Israel is putting together. Stay with me, Rajesh. I also want to expand the scope of the story. The question now is the stage set for expansion of operations towards southern Gaza, including Khan Yunis area, where leaflets have now been dropped asking people, ordering people to vacate some localities where Israel says it will target Hamas strongholds it has intelligence about. There are also growing calls for a ceasefire and international investigations into alleged war crimes by Israel. Joining me now on this special broadcast is Joshua Huntman, a strategist and advisor to the hostage families and also former advisor to the Minister of Defense. Mr. Huntman, there are reports that leaflets have been dropped over Khan Yunis asking people to evacuate. What does this indicate, and what does this mean for the hostage crisis?
Well, thank you very much for having me. And let's remember how this all began. This all began with the greatest terror attack and the greatest massacre of the Jewish people since World War II, since the Holocaust on October the 7th. Since then, over 240 hostages have been held, civilians, men, women, children, the elderly, babies. In fact, another baby was born in captivity just this week, held in Gaza, held in the terror tunnels. And the IDF and the government of Israel, they have a responsibility, in fact, they have a duty to bring those hostages home and to do everything they can in their power to bring those babies and those children and those grandparents back to their families. Furthermore, they have a duty to dismantle the terror infrastructure of Hamas, because Hamas have said very clearly that October the 7th is just the beginning. Their leaders have said that they want to do this over and over again. And therefore, we have a duty to defeat Hamas in its entirety and to rid both Israel and the Palestinian civilian population of this despicable evil.
But Joshua Huntman, I want to understand from you, if there is an expansion of these operations towards southern Gaza, in areas like Khan Yunis, will this adversely impact the release of hostages? There are reports that talks are in an advanced stage for release of between 50 to 70 Israeli hostages in return for 50 to 70 or maybe 100 Palestinian hostages in Israeli prison and perhaps 3 to 5 days of ceasefire.
So I think we have to understand there's always this parallel track going on. Of course, the diplomacy is going on behind closed doors. That has been widely reported. And it appears that they are working on a deal with the international community, with many interlocutors, in order to bring home as many of these hostages as soon as possible back to their families. Again, there are 3-year-old children there, 5-year-old children, babies. We need to bring them home. So that is one track. The other track is, of course, the military track. And whilst this really is unprecedented to have a democracy chasing after a jihadist organization which has captured and kidnapped over 240 members of its public, the military operation must continue. It must continue, and there have already been successes. Even on the first week of the operation, one of the hostages was found and saved and brought back to her family. So this parallel track of the diplomatic and the military must continue in order to bring the hostages back to their families.
Okay. There are reports that suggest that members of the Israeli war cabinet, they're in favor of expansion of operations to the southern parts of Gaza. Is the entire country on the same page on this? Will this help rescue the hostages, or will this delay that even further?
Look, Israel is like India. It's a vibrant democracy with many, many opinions. You can speak to 20 people in the streets of Israel and receive 20 different opinions. However, the whole of Israel is united behind defeating Hamas. Because like I said, if we don't defeat Hamas, they will just repeat October the 7th, or they will try to repeat October the 7th again and again. Now, we must understand, and you discuss this in your report, the entire Gaza Strip has been turned into this spider web of terror tunnels. Whilst Israel does everything to protect civilians on both sides, the Palestinians have put their civilians on top of the terrorists. The Hamas regime is hiding beneath their children, hiding beneath their hospitals, hiding beneath their mosques and schools, and have chosen to hide underground. If they have now moved to the south of the Gaza Strip, then the IDF has a duty to pursue them, kill them, and restore peace and security, not just to the south of Israel, but also to the Palestinian people.
I want to understand from you, and since you've been advisor to the Minister of Defense, how could Hamas, under the nose of Mossad, Shin Bet, or all of Israel's agencies, build this complex spider web of tunnels over a period of time? I mean, what were Israeli intelligence agencies doing all along that 1,300 odd tunnels, about 500 kilometers length and breadth of tunnels could come up in the Gaza Strip, that narrow Gaza Strip?
So we must understand, Israel left the Gaza Strip in 2006. Okay, we left the international community, but pressure on Israel to remove its communities, to remove its army bases. And what came in place was a terror regime. Hamas won an election, then kicked out, shot, and pushed their opposition off buildings. They turned it into a totalitarian, autocratic, theocratic Islamist enclave, and they turned the entire Gaza Strip into this terror base. Now, there have been many rounds of violence, as of course you have reported, and during those rounds of violence, Israeli intelligence has managed to put their hands on some of these terror tunnels, and indeed many of them have been destroyed. But when Israel left the Gaza Strip as a gesture of peace, they weren't expecting the Hamas regime and the Palestinians to turn this entire strip into a terror base. And now we are facing the consequences, and we have to deal with those consequences and remove this terror threat, both for the sake of Israeli civilians and indeed the Palestinian civilians. Because if we do not win this, if we do not deal with this threat now, then we will be speaking again in 6 months, in a year, with the same pictures on our screens, as Hamas have committed and said very loudly and clearly that they want to maintain this state of war, and they want to carry these acts out over and over again.
I want to understand from you. Israel stands accused of using a communication blackout as a weapon of war in the Gaza Strip. Internet down, communications cut off. Is this to force Hamas to release hostages?
Look, Israel is the only country in the history of warfare that, while fighting its enemies, actually sends over trucks of fuel and water and food and clothes, and actively encourages the international community to come in and build field hospitals in order to care for the humanitarian needs of the population. Israel is fighting a very, very difficult and complex war with a cynical and evil terrorist organization, which is doing its utmost to increase civilian damage, civilian deaths on both sides. So, Israel, I think, it's unprecedented what this country has done in order to protect.
But it's not just a communication blackout. It's not just a communication blackout. Look at reports that emerge from the Gaza Strip. There's shortage of food, there's no water, there's shortage of fuel, there's a shortage of medicines, and it's almost as if Gazans are being starved, forced to their knees so that Hamas releases hostages. Will this strategy work given this global criticism, rising global criticism that's coming Israel's way, Joshua?
There's one address for that criticism, and that address is Hamas, because not only did they start this brutal war that we didn't want, okay, on 6th of October, we had a ceasefire. They started this war, and they have also been stealing the food and stealing the fuel. How are they continuing to fire rockets at Israel without fuel? Clearly, there is fuel in the Gaza Strip because they're still firing rockets at Israel. How are there thousands of fighters living underground? They have food, they have water, but once again, it's an example of Hamas protecting themselves, protecting their terrorists, while completely ignoring the basic needs of their own civilian population. And it's yet another reason why they must be defeated.
You know, is Israel willing to consider a pause, a tactical pause or a ceasefire if hostages are returned? Or is the country on one page that Hamas and its enablers have to be finished first, hostages can return later?
So Israel has already implemented humanitarian pauses. There was a request from the international community, in particular from the Americans, and there were international pauses being implemented for a few hours a day in order to help vacate some of the civilian population from the north to parts of the areas in the south, and in order to save as many innocent Palestinian civilians as possible. You must understand, these scenes are heart-wrenching and heartbreaking for us as well. No one in Israel wanted this. We had a ceasefire on the 6th of October, but we are not going to agree to another ceasefire, which will just allow the Hamas regime and the Hamas terror operation to just rebuild, rearm, and get ready for their next round of jihadist violence and kidnappings and rape, butchering, murder, and beheadings. We simply will not allow that.
Because the Palestinian Red Crescent Society say that Israel's now punishing the people of Palestine. It's not just restricted to the Gaza Strip. Take, for example, what's happening at the West Bank. The ambulance staff are being detained. Their staff are being prevented from reaching out to the injured, even in the West Bank.
So first of all, let's be clear that on the 7th of October, we had our ambulances shot at. Indeed, a friend of mine who was an ambulance driver was shot and killed in his ambulance. The international community didn't say a word. On the other side, Israel is doing everything it can to protect the civilian population, to protect doctors, to protect ambulances, to work actually with the Red Cross, even though they have not had any access to our 240 hostages in Gaza, to protect the doctors and nurses who are doing God's work on both sides of this very difficult conflict.
And there is now a rising clamor, not just for a ceasefire, but some are saying Israel needs to be taken to the International Criminal Court for widespread loss of civilian life in the Gaza Strip. How would you respond to that?
Again, I think no country in the history of warfare has done more to protect civilian life on both sides of this. And I think that the democratic countries in the world who are facing this terror threat, like India, like the US, France, and the UK, understand very well what Israel is facing. They are backing Israel. And I believe that Israel will get the support of the enlightened nations in their fight against this Islamic extremist terrorism and in their fight towards freedom, so that lightness can indeed defeat the darkness and we can move towards a future of brotherhood and sisterhood and peace in our region, when the forces of darkness are finally defeated.
So for these forces of darkness to be defeated, before I let you go, I want to understand this. If this war is being expanded towards the south, beyond Wadi Gaza, into southern Gaza Strip, where do those people go? They're anywhere out in the open. They're cramped and millions are living in the open, as we are being told. Where will those people go if the war is expanded to the south?
So that's exactly what the flyers and the text messages and the phone calls are for. Again, I don't know the specific details and I can't get into operational intricacies because I'm just not made aware of them. But the leaflets and the text messages and the phone calls tell people where to go. Okay, there are safe spaces. There's lots of open land. There are field hospitals being set up. There are safe spaces, which unfortunately Hamas have been taking advantage of up until now. Again, their cynical, evil warfare, whereby they go where the civilians go to protect themselves. Quite the opposite of how normal armies work, that try and protect their civilians. They hide behind their civilians. So I would urge, and I would urge in every language for Palestinian civilians to heed the warnings that are being sent to them by the Ministry of Defense and the IDF. And I would urge Hamas to stop being cowards in their tunnels and to come out and fight, because they started this fight and they must be finished so that both sides can move on towards a future of peace and security.
Joshua Huntman for joining me here on this India Today special broadcast. Many thanks. Clearly, this writing is on the wall. Israel intends to expand this war. Now take it to the southern part of Gaza Strip.